Welcome to Romans 911 Project Talks. I'm Grant Berry, your host, founder of Reconnecting Ministries and author, producer of the Romans 911 Project. Beloved, this is truly a new day as the Jewish people begin to awaken spiritually and the Lord moves the church's focus back on Israel in prayer and witness. There's a shift in his body that is beginning to take place to realign us with Israel in the Spirit, in the one new man that we may not have recognized up until this time, especially now with 110 million believers praying for the salvation of Israel this past Pentecost in Jerusalem. God is on the move to awaken his church and rebuild its walls with his love. We call this message the Reconnection, and it's mostly been hidden during the church age and in the mystery of Romans 11. It's a special message of bonding, of love and unity between Jewish and Gentile believers and between all races and creeds to fulfill Yeshua's heart cry of John 17. Beloved, as believing Jews and Gentiles restore this love and unity, as the church in the nations reconnects with Israel's remnant, both in the land and the diaspora, we take back something strategic from the devil called division, which will only empower us through prayer and action to greater love and unity. In a sense, it's a power key to help open the door to God's end-time plans that will enable the Father to release the greater glory upon his church. God is moving everything into place, not just to shake the world, but also his church, that we may begin preparations for these days, that we, his bride, would arise out of the darkness and be made ready. Beloved, during this time and these adjustments for his church, may we be like the tribe of Issachar and the Bereans, who when seeing the shifts, not only fully recognized them, but did everything in their power to embrace them. This is the reason for the Romans 911 Project, to drill down deeper into this subject, to search it out like digging for a treasured jewel. And this is why we've launched the Romans 911 Media Plan, a global monthly watch on Zoom, weekly podcast discussing the Reconnection message with Charisma Magazine, all of which you can find on the Reconnecting Ministry website at romans911.org. And now, Romans 911 Project Talks, bi-monthly discussions with both Messianic and Christian leaders who are already moving in this message, and then to reach out to others who still may be questioning it. Today, beloved, I'm excited to introduce Dr. Michael Brown. Mike, welcome to Romans 911 Project Talks. You know, honestly, you don't really need an introduction. You are one of the most prolific Messianic leaders in the church today. But for the benefit of those maybe younger people in the church that don't know you, just to give a brief background, you are the founder and president of Ask Dr. Brown Ministries and the Fire of School Ministry, hosting an incredible daily broadcast every day, brother. I just don't know how you do it, called The Line of Fire. But you also have a wealth of experience in ministry in the church, writing over 40 books. I could just go on and on. So, Mike, tell us about your background and start with your early years, how you got into ministry, and even your relationship with Beth Messiah and Sid Roth, Dan Juster, and that whole crew in D.C.
Absolutely. So God saved me in 1971. I was 16 years old. I'm Jewish. I was a heroin shooting, LSD using hippie rock drummer. I went to a little church to pull my two best friends out, and God saved me, turned my life around radically. And my dad said, okay, Michael, I'm glad you're off drugs, but we're Jews. We don't believe this. So he brought me to meet the local rabbi. And I'd been bar mitzvahed. We would go to synagogue for the high holy days, but we were more nominal Jews than observant Jews. So, my dad was still concerned, brought me to meet the local rabbi. That began my dialogue with the rabbinic community, which has continued now for almost 52 years. Often unbroken, interacting with rabbis, counter-missionaries for decades, some of whom have become good friends of mine in the midst of our differences and conflicts. And I started preaching in 1973. In fact, just celebrated my 50th anniversary of my first message, which was August 21st,
Congratulations.
73. So I started preaching, had a burning heart to see the church come alive, to see the people of God surrendering to the Lord. And that's remained in my heart ever since. I've had the privilege of traveling around the world, probably more than 160 overseas trips, bringing the gospel around the world. That always beats in my heart. Training, raising up people for ministry. I've led various ministry schools and taught at many over the years. But along with that, as a Jewish person, I've been burdened for my people Israel to see them come to recognize Jesus, Yeshua, as the Messiah. So in 1987, we moved our family to Maryland to be part of Dan Juster's congregation. So Sid Roth was a founding member of that congregation. Paul Wilbur and Israel's Hope were the worship leaders there. If you can imagine that, they were the weekly worship team. And then other folks have been part of the congregation, Messianic pioneers like Manny Brotman in the early years, and Eitan Shishkov, who was then Andrew, been in Israel for over 20 years now, over 30 years.
30 years, yeah.
Over 30 years, since 1992, I think. So, he was the lead pastor under Dan in the congregation. I led the ministry school. So that's been a major part of my life. To this day, these brothers are friends of mine, and we work together for the common cause of seeing Israel saved. So Asher led a congregation a little bit north of us, but was part of our larger leadership team. Right, so we had on that larger leadership team, Dan Juster, Paul Wilbur, Asher and Trader, Eitan Shishkov, myself. So Asher was Keith then, Eitan was Andrew, and me. In fact, those who are familiar with the Tikkun ministry, Tikkun was the name of my ministry when I got there.
Are you serious?
And Tikkun Olam in Hebrew, which is world restoration. So it was called world restoration in English, but we had the Hebrew Tikkun Olam, and which is a rabbinic term for repairing the world. And as I got to know the brothers, they said, we're very covenantal. What's ours is yours, and what's yours is ours. And we like that name. We'd like it. And I thought, really, I'm more associated with the school there, Messiah Biblical Institute. So I just shifted my ministry name over there, Messiah Biblical Institute Outreach. And then, of course, it shifted from there over the years. But I was originally Tikkun, and then they liked the name, but it fit what they were doing much better.
Wow. And look where that's going today. Really wonderful expression of, and also connecting, having such a good spirit and connection to the church at large in the nations. It's a wonderful ministry. We got to connect also a long time ago, over 30 years ago, during Times Square Church Days. How did that actually come about, Mike, that you began to actually teach at Times Square?
Yeah, I had the privilege of speaking for Pastor David Wilkerson somewhere between 40 and 50 times. I remember the last year I'd spoken there, I looked at my calendar. There was 17 different times I was there in that year. So I was what was called a swing pastor. There were three of us that would come in on a regular basis, swing in, bring a message, and swing out. So it was a very sacred time and a great privilege. So there are a couple things that led up to that. One is that in 1983, God gave me an overwhelming burden to wake up the sleeping church, and a burden to see revival come to the church in America. And 6 years later, he sovereignly connected me with Leonard Ravenhill. That's a whole amazing story how God did it. But I mean, a sovereign thing that God did, connected me with this great man of God. At that point, I was 34, he was 82. I subsequently realized that there was 24 years between David Wilkerson and me, and 24 years between David Wilkerson and Leonard Ravenhill, interestingly. So we became very, very close. And I believe it was Brother Len who sent Brother Dave my book, How Saved Are We, which came out in 1990. Len had written the foreword to my first book on revival in 1989, The End of the American Gospel Enterprise. And then with each new book I wrote, I would send him a case and he would send them out to other leaders. So I believe he sent one of them to David Wilkerson. At the same time, there was a brother who reached out to me from Times Square Church, a Jewish brother, an old friend of ours, Chuck Cohen. And Chuck shared my burden for holiness and revival in the church. And of course, we all deeply respected and honored David Wilkerson as a major prophetic voice in the church of our day. And he was very close with Don Wilkerson, David's brother, one of the co-pastors, and began to mention my name. And I believe that David then read How Saved Are We, as he told me in one sitting, as I recall. It's not a long book, but he just devoured it. And I was supposed to meet with him just on a Friday after teaching on Long Island. I was supposed to drive into the city and meet with him. And his assistant called and said, how about if you preach instead tonight? Preach instead on Friday night. So that's how it started. And had the privilege of being there, as I said, many, many, many times, many sacred memories in that building of beautiful worship, extraordinary joy of the Lord, deep reverence for the word, great responses, great altar calls. So very, very sacred memories.
You know, Mike, I could speak to being one who was on the receiving end of that. It was just a very special time for those of us, you know, in the New York area. We were just getting so ministered to through your teachings, through Bob Phillips, through Pastor Dave and Pastor Don Wilkerson. I mean, talk about getting fat in the spirit.
Really?
I mean, we just, I mean, and these were foundational years for me. I mean, I got saved in 84, 85. So, you know, coming to Times Square Church and getting involved in the leadership of the Jewish ministry there with Arnie and Chuck just had such a amazing time and a building a foundation in my own life. And actually, I think it was the time I remember you and I were having this deep conversation in Hannah's house one day about the whole anti-Semitism thing, and you were getting the download for, you know, the writing the book about anti-Semitism, and I was getting the download about the generational influences, you know, and it's interesting how those two focuses have come out, you know, in that amazing book that you wrote. I think that you changed the name of it recently, right?
No, we just updated it. So our hands are stained with blood, the tragic story of the church and the Jewish people. I finished it in 91, and God held me back from publishing it for almost 9 months while I agonized in prayer over its release. I feel that was just part of birthing it, spiritually speaking. And then it came out in 92 and immediately started getting translated into other languages. It's the most translated book that I wrote.
How many languages, Mike?
Probably about 15.
Wow.
I lost track at a certain point. I remember tracking a dozen that I documented, but I believe it was a few since then. I still remember getting a note from the Chinese translator said, I'm laying on my face, wailing and screaming as I'm translating. He was so burdened by what he read. But of course, you know, when God breaks your heart with something, it has that impact on others. When he really grips you, it has that impact on others. So it was continuously in print from 92 until 2019. And then we just felt it was time to update it, to update some of the situations in the Middle East, to update some of the trends of anti-Semitism today, and as well as to beef up some of the sections about anti-Semitism in church history and the beautiful stream, but the smaller one of philo-Semitism. So it's the exact same book, Our Hands Are Stained with Blood, but updated and expanded in 2019. And then I wrote another one called Christian Anti-Semitism.
Ah, okay.
Which, yeah.
So that's my confusion. Okay, sorry about that.
That's a separate book. They complement each other, but there's very, very little overlap between them. Things that I barely touch on in Our Hands Are Stained with Blood, I expand in great detail and really get into some of the wrong theologies. You know, it's extraordinary, Grant, that if you look at it, you have this rise of virulent Black anti-Semitism among extreme Hebrew Israelite groups. Not only do they claim to be the real Jews, which is a totally separate issue, but but Ashkenazi Jews in particular, they have a special disdain for it. You know, they call us Esau, and your time is coming, and we're going to crush you. So you have that on the one side. Then you have the white anti-Semites, the radical, quote, Christian nationalists, and they also hate the Jewish population, especially white Jews. And this has been something I've documented for decades, that white supremacists and black supremacists have one thing in common: they hate the Jews.
Oh,
and it just shows you how demonic all this is. You know, Grant, I remember us talking when I was working on my 5-volume series on answering Jewish objections to Jesus, and just needing to try to slow down schedule a little to devote more time to writing. And your company then helped share in that, helped underwrite that to enable me to do that. So Mike, you played a role.
Yeah, it was a great blessing. I was just praying about that today as I was driving in the car, just to thank you, Lord, to be able to contribute to things like that, you know, when I was in the business world. But beloved, I want to tell you, there's something significant about this book for us even today, and we still promote this on the Reconnecting Ministries website. And when we look about anti-Semitism in the church, let's just be careful, you know, not to fall into the trap of condemnation, but we must still become aware of the history of how it took the church in a different direction, because the Lord is now bringing us back, Mike. And so, you know, it's not that we necessarily in the modern church are to blame for this, but it has had such an influence to cause separation that it's so important for us now to delve into the history, because the Father wants to sort of bring healing and restore love and unity in the church, right?
Yeah, and I would say two things to that in terms of when do we have to deal with a sinful past, right? If you found out that 14 generations ago someone in your family did something wicked, does that mean you have to repent of it today? No, in my view, we have to deal with these things. One, if the seed is still there, the attitude, the mindset, the wrong theology. Yes. And two, if the effects are still there. I mean, let's take, for example, something we're dealing with a lot in America. Is there systemic racism and things like that? And as I've looked at it, I'm no expert, but I've looked at it a lot. What is clear to me is, even if on a larger level in society, there is not systemic racism, there are still the results of the systemic racism in the past that haven't been fully corrected. In other words, if you look at the net worth of your average Black American family and compare that to the net worth of your average white American family, the average net worth of the white American family is much higher. Now, is that due to systemic racism today? I don't believe so. Is it due to a history that still has not been totally adjusted or addressed? So it's not about reparations. It's a matter of, okay, what can we do? Do we need to recognize things more? You know, for example, I was talking to a group of pastors a few weeks ago, and I said, how many of you know the origins of the Southern Baptists? And almost none of them did. Well, Southern Baptists broke away from the Northern Baptists because they wanted to keep their slaves. And all the founders of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary were slave owners who justified their practices biblically. I only learned that a few years ago, right? Some of my Black Christian friends, they knew it for a long time. In the same way, I quote Catholic scholar Edward Flannery in Our Hands Are Stained with Blood. Flannery said that the pages of history that Jews have memorized, Christians have torn out of their books. So why do we bring it up today? It's not to beat us up over the past. It's not to say, well, you were guilty of the Holocaust, or you were guilty of the Inquisitions, or you were guilty of the Crusades. No, God forbid. Not to say that at all, but it's to say this. The same theology that opened the door to Jew hatred in past history, replacement theology, is alive and well today. Even though many people who hold to it are not anti-Semites in any way, when the rubber meets the road, when there's a conflict, say in the land of Israel, they will almost automatically, if there's strong replacement theology, almost automatically see things from the viewpoint of the Palestinians, because they don't believe that God brought the Jewish people back to the land. Those of us who recognize that God brought the Jewish people back to the land will say, yeah, we can call out Israel for what it does wrong, but we're not going to delegitimize it and demonize it and entirely take the other side. So in other words, it works itself out practically to this day. And as we see the rising tide of anti-Semitism, once again, I mean, for many years now, it's been on the same levels as it was worldwide before the Holocaust, but now spiking in other ways with what I mentioned, the white radical anti-Semitism and the black radical anti-Semitism. All the more do we need a right theology of Israel and the Jewish people. And that's why these things are live issues. That's why our hands are stained with blood. And it's essential reading, what you're doing, essential reading for this moment.
And these things also can affect us spiritually. They can travel from generation to generation. I mean, if you've had a parent or close friend or grandparent that is steeped in, anti-Semitic stuff, those influences can travel from one generation to the next. And for example, I mean, when the Lord's giving the Ten Commandments, he says that the sins of the father travel to the third and fourth generation. So there can be a lingering influence. And we see this also in the church. I mean, if we look at Romans 11 and the edicts that God's given to the church to minister to Israel, to love them on account of the patriarchs, to draw them to jealousy, never to be arrogant, thinking that we've replaced them, and with the mercy that we've received as a result of their disobedience, to release that mercy back to them. Yet we see a stoniness, a hardness, and an indifference. And so these things we need to bring to light now, to go deeper, actually to break off the way the enemy is maintaining and fueling separation between us. So, Mike, we're doing everything we can to continue to promote this book and not in any way to point the finger. We really believe at this point the Father wants to release that mercy to wash away the negative influences so that we can be brought together in greater love and unity.
Yes, absolutely. And look, our hearts beat for the Great Commission. Our hearts beat for the Messiah's return. Our hearts beat for the unity of the body. This is not either or. As I said, I've been overseas over 160 times. I've only been to Israel maybe 18 times. I've been to India 28 times. I've been to Italy 27 times. Or let's just say out of 160 plus overseas trips, 140 plus have not been to Israel. It's almost 10 times as many trips to other nations as to Israel. So it's not like we just focus on Israel, forget the rest of the world. No, this is for the health of the body as a whole.
Yes.
It's just like if you're not eating properly, it's not just you're hurting your stomach, you're hurting your whole body, you're hurting your mind, you're hurting your bones. So this is something for the health of the body, just like we want everyone to have a heart for unity and to love those that are part of the body of Messiah. We want everyone to have a heart for the Great Commission, that the message of the gospel will be known, that the name of Jesus will be known around the world. And we want everyone to have a heart for the salvation of Israel. A Jewish Jerusalem must welcome the Messiah back, and it is through a Jewish Messiah that the world is saved. So there is a connectivity and an indebtedness, and we're indebted one to another. I'm indebted to the Gentile Christians that prayed me into the kingdom and that pray for me to this day, and they're indebted to a Jewish Messiah and Jewish apostles that brought the message, etc. So it's a mutual interdependence, and we need one another. It's not a separate mission. This is not, hey, I'm Jewish, I have a burden to reach Jewish people. These are larger, eternal issues that we're talking about.
A beautiful one new man unity that changed the world in the first century, and please God is going to change the world again in the 21st century. Moving on a little bit, Mike, I was there when you debated Tovia Singer at Yale. I think it was at Yale, right? I mean, it's a long time ago now, so forgive me if I can't remember.
I debated Tovia at a house in Maryland. That was an unexpected encounter. Then I debated him on Sid Roth's radio show.
Okay.
After which, when I kept reaching out to him, after which he subsequently cut me off and has refused to deal with me ever since. I gave an outreach lecture at Yale, and then fielded questions from students. as well as debated Rabbi Shmuley in different settings.
Do you still have those recordings, by the way?
Oh, yeah. We still have the Yale lecture, I believe, on anti-Semitism. I believe we still have that. And the Tovia one, he had asked me not to release the recordings. People just put tape recorders on the desk. Real quick, what happened was there was a Russian Messianic Jew who was newly saved and hadn't quite become fully sanctified in honesty yet, and reached out to me and said, we lived in Maryland then, there are some rabbis from Baltimore that were going to come over to his house and were willing to have a discussion with me, a debate with me at his house on who's the real Messiah according to the book of Isaiah. I thought, are you kidding me? Why would they want to debate that with me? I said, of course. I was surprised he did it. And then he invited these counter missionaries over, also on false pretenses. So he lied to both of us. Like I said, he was brand new in the Lord, because he wanted to see who could do better in a spontaneous debate without notes or preparation.
Oh, wow.
And I show up there, and it's Tovia Singer, who I just started to hear about, but he was there, and Michael Skolback, who is a counter missionary based in Canada, Mickey Miller, who was a counter missionary in Philadelphia, and a woman named Joanne Chinkers, who had been a believer but was now a counter missionary. And then maybe 15, 20 total people there. And some people just brought tape recorders, put it there, and then he gave out a whole program. The Russian Jewish believer put out a whole program of what the night was going to be and what topics we would cover. So Tovia subsequently asked me to not release those. I think we still have those tapes, but then subsequently, and interestingly, that night contributed to God really shaking Joanne Chinkers. And if you ask her to this day, who led you to the Lord, she'll say Tovia Singer. Because that night was so decisive in her life. She, for years now, has served sacrificially. She's in her 60s as a missionary in Nigeria, teaching the poorest of the poor. What a light to the nations. She'll go into a Muslim village because they hear about you're getting better education. I mean, terribly impoverished. I'm talking about women dying in childbirth. I'm talking about people dying from snake bites. I'm talking about witch doctors kidnapping people and cutting them up to use their body parts for magical ceremonies. Really, really rural, difficult areas, not far from Boko Haram, in fact. And she'll go into a Muslim village because they'll call her in and she'll say, if you want education, it's going to be Jesus-centered. We will talk. It's the best education you could get in the region. And they say, okay, we'll have it. So she was there. So subsequently, Sid asked Tovia and I to come on his show, and when he had a big station at Blanketed, New York, and to do a moderated 90-minute debate with audience calling in as well. 700 Club was there and filmed the whole thing, and they gave us forms to sign before the debate, releasing them to use it. Tovia said, I'll sign afterwards. When it was done, he refused to sign. So that never got released. And then subsequently, Sid and I got on the phone because the debate went over 90 minutes with calls and other things. And together, we agreed on how to edit the debate to get it on a 90-minute cassette. Remember, cassettes back then,
right?
You had 60 minutes, 90 minutes was the longest. So we removed some extraneous material. Yeah, that call's not really relevant. That's not. We agreed on it together and put it out. And then I really started to reach out to Tovia. We talked a lot at night. Heart-to-heart talks. We were both late-night people. I got really burdened to pray for him, and then he cut me off completely. And he's got a whole bogus version of what happened. Either he's misremembering or just not telling the truth. But that's what happened. And if folks go to realmessiah.com, and just scroll down to debates, they will find that old debate with Tovia and me. It's just the audio because, again, the video was stopped by Tovia.
Beloved, for those of you not familiar with Tovia Singer, he is pretty well known in the Jewish community as an anti-missionary, and focuses on Jewish people that are that are meeting Yeshua, meeting Jesus as the Mashiach, as Messiah, and often encourages them into a deprogramming. I've had many friends in the past that have gone through some of those even a kidnapping 20 or 30 years ago. A good friend of mine actually experienced from some of those anti-missionaries. But we still pray for Tovia Singer. Hallelujah. We will not give up, right? May he be a Paul May he be
Yeah.
a Saul Paul in the faith, right? That's the beauty about prayer, right? We never stop.
You never stop. And most of the counter missionaries that I know are decent people. We interact. Some of us have exchanged thousands of pages of emails and writings back and forth to one another. What Toby's done is he's shifted to just attack Christianity in general for some years now. In other words, he is aggressively trying to pull Gentile Christians away from the faith. So that's how he's become better known. Now, thankfully, we hear from people regularly who say, boy, I was really confused by his videos, or I lost my faith and then I saw yours, because we've been putting out refutations of some of his just to expose the error and the deception in his videos. And thankfully, they're coming back to the faith and getting grounded. But that's how he's become better known, and it's all the more nefarious. But listen, God's truth stands. There have been false teachers, there have been false prophets, there have been counter missionaries of sorts for centuries. It's always been here. And God's truth stands, and God's Ekklesia, his Messianic congregation, continues to grow around the world.
Amen.
But I just feel bad for those who get hurt and picked off by lies and misinformation.
Yeah. It's always good to be on the side of truth.